Parking problems. When one man tried to go to small claims court in Fort Wayne and then realized he wasn't allowed to use the handicap spots in the lot next to the building, he called 15 Finds Out.
Investigator Alyssa Ivinson went to that parking lot and brought ADA experts with her. She joins us now with what she discovered. Alyssa.
Well, the lot next to the courthouse annex building on Superior is for county employees only. So the accessible spots there are employees only too. But that was a big problem for Dan Headley, who just needed to get to court.
With a cane and oxygen tank, it's not easy for Army veteran Dan Headley to get around.
Never, ever take for granted your ability to breathe freely and to walk. And I can't do that anymore.
That struggle.
And this just put a crimp in it.
Magnified a month ago.
This is where I had to go to court.
He filed a suit in small claims court.
And I came down to check out parking.
At the courthouse annex building off West Superior.
And I met with this. They got handicap parking, but employee only. And I said, how can they make that restriction on a handicap slot? So I called you.
15 Finds Out went to the lot and took Fifth Freedom with us.
It's an unfortunate situation.
Doug Schmidt is the ACT team coordinator for the Disabilities Advocacy Group.
There are no laws being broken.
Schmidt explained that a private lot is not required to offer public accessible parking.
Well, the courthouse serves the public.
Yes.
So they're not required to have adjacent public parking?
They're not required to have adjacent public parking. There's no ADA requirement for maximum distance between parking and the buildings that it serves. If the public parking that you offer is 1,000 miles away from your building, that's where the accessible parking is going to be.
The American Disabilities Act only requires a certain number of accessible spots when and where public parking is provided. It also doesn't have specific rules for on-street parking.
Is this a loophole?
It's kind of an oversight in ADA regulations.
Indiana's regulations for accessible street parking only come into play when public on-street parking already exists, which it doesn't on the annex building's corner.
It would be nice if there were, accessible public parking on this block, but they are in compliance with all the laws and regulations, and they're not required to offer more.
This accessible spot is the only one on the block, and it services several buildings. The next closest is 2 blocks away. There's one more on the street and then a parking garage.
At Fifth Freedom, we would always like to see more done than just the regulations. The laws and regulations are kind of written to be, bare minimum. We consider best practices to be a bit more. That would be entirely up to them, what they wanted to do.
I think it's excessive. At least one of these slots ought to be public. I mean, when I pulled up, this was empty.
Now Dan just hopes the county decides to go above and beyond the law.
It just seemed that there could be a few slots for the people that are doing business here. I know it's okay, it's not required by law, but how about a little common courtesy?
While we were shooting this story, an employee actually came up to us and told us that they see people who need accessible parking to use that building have trouble finding a spot all the time. Well, 15 Finds Out took these concerns to Allen County Commissioner Nelson Peters. Hear his reaction tomorrow at 5. For 15 Finds Out, I'm Alyssa Ivinson.
Not illegal, but definitely not ideal.
That is how an advocacy group for the disabled described the parking at the courthouse annex building in downtown Fort Wayne.
After a disabled veteran called 15 Finds Out investigator Alyssa Ivinson, she discovered a real parking problem, and tonight we're going a step further and taking the issue to the top. Alyssa?
Well, Allen County Commissioner Nelson Peters was surprised to get my phone call, saying they haven't had many complaints, if any, about accessible parking in that lot. But now that we told him about Dan Headley's problem, changes could be coming soon.
How could they restrict this to employees and not to the people that are actually using the facility?
The question Dan Headley had when he pulled into an accessible spot in the courthouse annex lot off West Superior.
I'm not quite as ambulatory as I used to be.
With a cane and oxygen, walking even a few blocks to get to small claims court would be too much for him. But the lot attached to the building is for county employees only, so the accessible spots are too.
I didn't understand how they could do that. You found that out.
Fifth Freedom, a disabilities advocacy group, met 15 Finds Out at the lot and explained that a private lot is not required to offer public accessible parking, and there's no requirement for public parking close by.
If the public parking that you offer is 1,000 miles away from your building, that's where the accessible parking is going to be.
A metered spot across the street is the closest accessible spot. Then there's another one on the street and a parking garage 2 blocks away.
It would be nice if there were, accessible public parking on this block, but they are in compliance with all the laws and regulations, and they're not required to offer more.
Nobody's really called us. Don't oftentimes recognize there may be problems or issues until somebody calls to say, hey, you got a problem or an issue.
15 Finds Out took the parking predicament to Allen County Commissioner Nelson Peters.
This operation 1 year ago was moved over from Berry Street, and there was no public parking there either. So parking spots are a premium downtown. They're especially a premium for county employees, and so we're trying to get people into the buildings and get them close by first. But this particular issue, it's worth rethinking.
Peters says all the employees who park in the lot work in the annex building. There are 3 accessible spots there, but Peters wasn't sure how many employees actually have tags and use them.
If the commissioners were to make this kind of partially public or something like that, would that be a great solution to you?
Yeah, I think so. Just a few slots.
Fifth Freedom said their words here. They're breaking no rules, no laws, no
Right.
regulations. Could it be better? Yes.
And I would agree with that. And again, it's not a matter from my perspective as to whether or not we're breaking rules or breaking laws. I mean, obviously you don't want to do that, and we won't do that. But if we can make a situation better for the people that we serve, that's what we're elected to do.
Peters says he's already brought it up to the other commissioners.
Is there a remedy that you think is most appropriate, which might include parking for handicapped individuals in this parking lot? And we'll have to look at the other parking lots too and just see how they're structured as far as handicap accessibility.
Now, it's not clear just yet when those changes or if those changes could come. For 15 Finds Out, I'm Alyssa Ivinson.
There are now more handicapped accessible parking spots in downtown Fort Wayne.
The change was revealed today, and it was all brought about by a 15 Finds Out investigation. Today, Alyssa Ivinson met with the veteran who started the whole thing.
Well, Dan Headley says he's happy his concerns translated to changes that will help other people. City and county leaders thanked him and us for bringing the parking problem to their attention.
This is where you parked before. That is now open to the
They
public.
took the sign down. Outstanding.
A change in accessible parking thanks to Dan Headley.
It feels pretty good that there's a little bit more access to people that have trouble getting around.
Dan's a veteran and is now on oxygen.
I never expected to end up in this shape, but now that I have, I understand the need for accessibility.
That need wasn't met when he tried to go to the Allen County Courthouse Annex building on the corner of Superior and Calhoun. So he called 15 Finds Out. Last month, our investigation showed you the accessible spots in the lot next to the building were for county employees only. It wasn't illegal, but it was not ideal.
Okay, it's not required by law, but how about a little common courtesy?
15 Finds Out pointed out the parking problem to Commissioner Nelson Peters, who immediately went to work with the city to find a solution.
Hats off to you guys first for bringing it to our attention.
Nelson called me and said, hey, we need to work together and get this done.
While they were surveying the block, they saw the problem firsthand. A woman with her disabled father parked in the employee-only accessible spot.
It was obvious that something needed to change.
So we've made the changes. Government can be responsive, government can be collaborative, government can be sensitive.
Now 3 new spots on Calhoun. One is accessible. One space in a county lot lost a sign and is no longer employees only. And a metered spot on Harrison now changed to be accessible.
We want this to be a destination point. We want this to be a situation where individuals can get in and get out and get their services and their needs met without having to worry about where to park.
Great move in the right direction. I mean, you can meet the minimum requirements, but until you start becoming the best you can be, we're not the community we should be.
A community Dan is happy he could help.
Knowing that I've affected a good change that's pretty all right. I don't do that very often.
People were using the new spots within minutes of them being opened this morning. One woman told us she was thrilled to have an accessible spot so close to the building. For 15 Finds Out, I'm Alyssa Ivinson.